Hi, I'm Tilly Strauss. I'm an artist from rural New York, but really about 2 hours north of New York City. And I live on a farm where we make maple syrup. I'm the clerk of the community as well. And I've been a teacher for 26 years. I come from a family of historians, writers, and archivists and artists, and that has been my impetus behind this project. I'm really so glad you're here, and I'm hoping that if you have any comments or questions, that we can address them at the end. And if you're on YouTube, if you could sign in, then you can be able to utilize the chat, and I can get to those things. So, um, there are great women artists everywhere. That's what I'm finding it everywhere and at all times. We just haven't been taught about them, and only a fraction of them have been on the historical record. What brought me to this whole project, I'm doing 10 this year, 10 women, one a month this year, is I'm inspired by what's been left out of my education. I'm an art history major. I have an art history degree from CU Boulder. And I kind of, even when I was there, I thought it was hard to be successful or imagine a successful art career if I couldn't see anybody, any examples of anybody like me. So this project has kind of come out of that. And that's one of the things I'm searching for. So I'm focusing on famous and forgotten women. Now, this is Judith Leyster, and she worked at the same time as Rembrandt. He was born in 1606 to 1669. He lived about, if you walked from Judith's house to his house, it would take you about 4 hours. But they had totally different careers. And her story is short, unfortunately. And I think that's got to be changed. She was forgotten for 230 years after she died. I mean, she was nowhere. And then when her stories come up and we found that her works were attributed to the wrong people and they get reattributed to her, the values of early 20th century men wrote the story, and they pretty much say that her whole career is in 7 years, that basically she became a master, painted, and once she got married, she quit painting because that fit the story really nice. It's a fairy tale of 7 years. In the 1980s, Linda Nochlin gave a famous lecture, and wrote an article about why have there been no great women artists. And Frima Fox Hochfrichter, she's an art historian in the 1980s. She set out to change that. So a lot of what I'm giving you is helped definitely by her interrogation of finding these. Judith Leyster herself, she did. So let's go on to the next. Let's keep going. So here, Judith was part of a huge family. Her father was in the beer business, which was huge in Haarlem, where they were. Haarlem actually provided all the beer for Holland in these years. And when Judith was 11 years old in 1620, there were 100 brewers registered. So it was a huge business, a lot of competition suddenly, and her parents go bankrupt. And at that point, they have to send the kids out to find some sort of trade to contribute to the family income. Now, the brewery was called Leyster, which means lodestar or leading star or shooting star, however you want. And Judith takes that, and she has the J and the L and a shooting star, that monogram next to the beer mug, is how she adopts that as her signature. Now, if you want to know more about all this, I've just created a zine that's available, and it has more in depth about the beer business for sure. So she's born, and pretty much born, lives, and dies in Haarlem, this area. She dies actually in Heemstede and is buried. It's about a 17-minute car ride from Haarlem. And like I said, it's a major center for beer production and also flower bulbs. And I think the nickname for Harlem is something about the blooming city. So when she was living in the 1600s, it's the Dutch Golden Age. And to just give you a quick recap on the setting there, the Spanish, they had a long religious war and they were under Spanish sort of containment. And that ended in the 1570s, just a couple decades before Judith was born. But the place was devastated. There were parts of Harlem that were completely burned to the ground. All the industry was gone. And part of the negotiation for the terms of peace and everything that the Dutch were able to maneuver to end this war was a focus on religious tolerance. They were going to let everybody it was the most religious tolerant place in all of Europe at this point. And it didn't matter if you were a Muslim, Protestant, Catholic, you were welcome. The town council decided that to build the businesses back and build up the economy, they sent out proposals for workers. They were hoping to get people from all over. And what they attracted with this religious tolerance was not just workers for the economy, but they got artists and writers and scientists and everything. So it was a very rich time and Judith was able to get into the art career without any, family history of it. So the other background of it is that totally new patrons now. We've talked about Sophonisba, who painted for the royalty. She was a court painter. And then we talked about Sophonisba, who also had royal patrons, but she dealt with a lot of rich aristocracy and men who would have galleries like the one in the background of this picture, which is like Pierre Crozat, who was like one of the biggest European collectors. And you see tons of work up and down on the walls and everything. It's totally different in Harlem and the area that Judith is. There you have a merchant class and they're collecting artwork just to beautify their home. And they're looking for a subject matters like landscapes, still lifes, or domestic scenes. And these are called genres. And a genre is just a subject matter, but there's also subgenres. You can have a still life, but then you can have a vanitas, which is a still life with like a skull or a smoldering candle or something like that. So there's all these, and then you can have a domestic scene, but you can also have a subgenre of a morality tale. Like in the scene, it's telling a story of what to do or not to do. So there's all these different levels, and artists sort of are putting out that kind of work, and they're not doing commissions, and there's no commission records for Judith. Basically, they have a shop and they have workers and patrons come and purchase from them. So they might have best-selling images and they might make many copies of those. So, well, we know that Judith was a member of the St. Lucas Guild. St. Luke is the patron saint of artists. And the guilds were there since medieval times. They control the market, they control prices, they control access to training. We know by their records that Judith had to have an apprenticeship, because she's one of the two women, and she's the first, who were actually granted the title of master, which is a pretty amazing. The thoughts are that she could have studied with Frans Hals, who actually lived in Harlem. There's a museum, the Frans Hals Museum there today. And there's probably evidence that she copied one of his pieces earlier in her life. It's more likely, though, that she studied under Peter de Greber, another artist who actually had a daughter, Maria, the same age as Judith. So that would have been a more comfortable place to go. And you can see here a historian passing through, Samuel Amsig. He published an account in 1628, and it's under this title of "Who Has Ever Seen Paintings by a Daughter?" And he brings out Leyster as being good and bold sense and everything. So there's chances are that she was with Peter de Greber's thing. But wherever she trained, by 1629, she was signing her own paintings as an independent artist. The problem with her story, there's several, is that men are all over it. Their persistent presence ends up them taking credit for it. A lot of her paintings have been misattributed to Halls, or you'll see other people. So this is her masterpiece, really. It's at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And it's a self-portrait of her. She's only 21 years old. And she's wearing a very formal outfit, lace cuffs, this incredible collar that's like no way that she was actually painting in that. So this piece is actually just to show how prosperous she is. This is an advertisement piece, really. She's showing that she's a well-to-do, rich artist who's obviously done well. She's turned, and there's that momentary pause, which you'll see in most of all of her works. Her elbow is on the top of the chair. There's a little nub there. It's not a comfortable place to rest your elbow, but she's just like turning and looking at us. And in her hands, in her other hand, holding the palette and the rag, that's just so impressionistic, are 18 brushes. So she's showing like how skilled she is as an artist. You got to be really skilled to use 18 brushes. So at this point, we know she had a studio that she'd been running for 3 years on her own. This is an X-ray that was taken at the National Gallery of Art. And what's interesting here is you can see on the canvas that she's working on is a face, and that Judith changed it. And as they've been X-raying other pieces of her work, they see that she would edit on the canvas as she went along. We don't have any sketches or anything like that, but paper doesn't last as long. So it's likely that she switched this portrait out to put this, what's called a merrymaker. It's another genre, a subgenre, and it's the one that she was most profitably known for. And there's an example of her painting right next to it, another one. And they're these small sizes. She worked small because you saw the Dutch homes. There were small, intimate spaces, right? So it looks like the same guy playing the chest violin there. She does a lot of musicians, a lot of merrymaking and everything. What's interesting, though, to me, the more I read about this piece, and there's a video analyzing it through the National Gallery of Art, if you go to their website, that's really helpful, is the position she's in. So let's look at the next slide. Let me explain something. Okay, I wanted to talk about placement in pictures, and so I just brought up shields because since the medieval ages, there were rules, and these were passed down through the guilds of where you can place things in an image. I didn't pick the best images here of shields because they're all very well balanced and symmetrical. But if you had an asymmetrical design, you would have your heraldic right. Picture that you're holding the shield, and your right would be what we see as the left, the heraldic right, the dexter. And then you have the heraldic left, the sinistra, which these are Latin, but sinistra becomes sinister. And it's on the left that women and beasts are supposed to be, and on the right that men are supposed to be. Let's look at the next piece. I tried to find paintings of men painting, and there's only one portrait of Rembrandt painting, and he's actually across the room, a small little figure, and his canvas is up close to the viewer, and that's in the MFA in Boston that he painted in 1628. But basically Rembrandt and most of the men, if you look up Van Gogh and all of them, they're just painting themselves. They don't have this urge or this seemingly need that women artists seem to have when they're painting, to paint themselves at the easel in the process. It's like women have to prove their ground. But here you can see Gerard van Honthorst at the dexter, and you can see Sophonisba at the sinistra. So whatever she did, she was definitely happy. And we think that she put herself in this spot because she was granted the title of master. So that's what we're going to go with. It's very rare in the 17th century to see a portrait of a woman smiling with teeth showing. Basically, if they were showing their teeth, they were either drunk or mentally unstable. This is this is a rare piece, and it's just, I think it's so delightful. And before we move on to the next slide, I want to point out too, in most of her pieces, she has this sort of earthen color background, a very shallow space with the background and some shadows on it. But that's just something to watch for her work, because I'm actually hoping by the end of this talk, you will be able to go out and identify a Judith Leyster of your own. Here's two paintings. One's on the left by Judith is called The Jolly Topper, and the one on the right is The Merry Drinker by Frans Hals. There's constantly been confusion between these two artists. And in fact, The Jolly Topper went into the Rijksmuseum as a Frans Hals, even though, and I've circled it in red, right above there is her monogram, right? I mean, you can't get more center of the piece, but nobody paid attention to that. And when it was reattributed in 1927, it was also dated as a painting done in 1629, which would have been one of her first paintings of her career as an independent artist. But you're going to find most all of her paintings are shoved to 1929. But let's just take this and say, okay, this is one of her earliest paintings. All right. This Hals was her contemporary in the town. She definitely knew him. Whether she trained with him or not, we don't know. But we do know that Judith brought a lawsuit against Frans Hals in 1635. She had three male students, and one of them left after 2 weeks and joined Frans Hals. And this was a breach of contract. So she filed with the St. Luke's Guild and got money back, and fines were leveled. And that's just pretty incredible that she had that agency and could do that. It's pretty incredible. So this is a piece called The Serenade. The dates are problematic. Look, they're giving this the same year as The Jolly Topper. So anyway, her parents had moved to Utrecht, and Judith goes there for a little while before she returns to Haarlem. She'd rather stay in Haarlem. But while she was in Utrecht, she definitely ran into this group of artists called the Caravaggisti, and they were inspired by Caravaggio, the Italian artist who uses this sort of shallow depth and these dramatic lighting. We do know that she was called revolutionary for her halo lighting, which I thought was really visible in this serenade around his hat. And she becomes one of the first, and only for a long time, artists that work by night scenes, candlelit night scenes. I also want to point out, with the lighting and the drama and the sort of the solid walls, she always has kind of a diagonal composition to her works. So you can keep an eye out for that. All right. Here's two paintings by two different artists. One is Judith's on the left and Jan Steen on the right. One of the subgenres was trick-track paintings, and this is a backgammon-like game. And I just put these up together because you can see that Judith is a lot more, the woman has a lot more dignity and seems to be on equal footing with the males in the game. And that, I think, speaks of her sort of feminist outlook, really. Whereas the Jan Steen, I gotta say, there became a phrase over time that was calling a Jan Steen household, which meant chaos and everything. He painted, his scenes are all chaos. There's an overturned chair. There's a man in the back groping a woman next to it. The man at the very left edge is sort of drunken and looks like he's staggering, and he's trying to pour something from a jug into his glass and missing a little bit. The man at the table with the woman is kind of leaning over, somewhat provocatively, you could say, with a low neckline and everything. And he's bending above her and handing her a pipe. Whereas in Judith's piece, which has the candlelight, she's handing a pipe herself to the player across the table. So and also what I like is her diagonal corner of the table coming out to the viewers. And you know that Sofonisba did that with her chess game, and Caravaggio was supposedly influenced by that. And here we might see Judith taking that from Caravaggio. So This piece is one of my, it's a tender piece. It's only 12 by 9 inches. A lot of her pieces too were small like that. And it's got all the hallmarks of her work. It's got the mud wall in the background, the shadows, the candlelight, the halo around the woman's head kind of, but it's called The Proposition, and the man has got his hand on her shoulder, and he's holding some money out, and this is a painting that, you wouldn't necessarily see a man paint because it's really the woman in it is not looking like she's welcoming this attention at all. She's sitting at her place, and at her feet, you can't really see, but there are little embers. She's got one of those boxes of coals to warm her feet. So she's sitting there. She's not just passing through or ready to jump up and do something else. Frima Fox Hopfrichter, the historian I was telling you about, she also points out that to sew in Dutch slang means to have sex. So that kind of gives this whole idea behind the thing. This is dated 1631, but we can go with that or not. But anyway, this piece is called The Concert, and it's definitely a self-portrait of her, and she's in the middle, and on the left is her future husband, if this is 1633. Jan meets Molenaar, who is an artist who studied under Hals. And Hals, when they get married, Hals actually paints pendant portraits of the two of them as a wedding gift. And we know that Molenaar was a musician. He had a huge collection of musical instruments when he dies. He's playing a chest violin. That's what they had in those days. It hadn't moved up to the chin yet. And she's holding a music book, which was the rave of things to have at that time, were these music books. So it's a merrymaking scene. They're making music together, and so that's in that genre of things. Now, when she gets married, in the 1600s, women have like half the rights, if that, and twice the duties. So this is about the end, what historians say is like the end of her career. Okay. Now I did a little bit of a drawing of Jan meets Molenaar's painting because I just didn't want to put his painting up here. I don't know. So I did a drawing of a detail of it where she is actually posing for his thing. She poses for her husband. There is documents that they worked on each other's paintings, so it's very hard to see. She rarely signed her work after this, and if she did, she would use the name Molenaar, her last name. But they moved to Amsterdam right away, where he becomes a member of the guild and sells. She is not allowed to sell her work anymore because the St. Luke's Guild is in Haarlem. Amsterdam is 4 hours away by car. By walking, actually, by walking 4 hours away. So they say, historians have said, she manages the business affairs. They make a good living. They live very well, and they end up, she might have bartered and traded her work, just couldn't sell it for money. And she runs 2 households at this point. So, but she's never really mentioned again as Judith Leyster. So, go on. They have 5 kids, and she does a lot of kid paintings earlier or later, we don't know. 3 of her children die before they reach adulthood. When she dies at the age of 50, Helena is 17 and one of the sons is 10, and those are the only 2 left. We know in Amsterdam during this time that there were several waves of the bubonic plague that passed through, so it must have been a tremendously stressful time to be a mother too. Lots of these children paintings that she's done are in private collections, and they're all given the dates of 1629, that first year. There's several versions of each. They're all energetic, moving poses, and I believe, and Hochfechter does too, that they might be done through the lens of a mother. They could have been painted after she got married, but those ones on the foreheads over to the side are actually drawings I've done of children in her paintings. So there was a subgenre of children's games because they would tell stories. And so this one is a little girl. She's about to pull the tail of a cat and she's got her finger up wagging, and the guy has an eel in his hand. And this actually relates to a Dutch proverb, that it's a morality tale that teaches a lesson. It's got the date right before she gets married, 1635, but there's a copy of it, a variation of it at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, and it's labeled either a Hall's or a Leyster. So, because like I said, Halls and her did the same sort of subject matter, like drinking couples. We know this carousing couple, which was called Merry Company when the Louvre Museum purchased it, is her portrait and her husband's portrait. And then on the right is a Frans Hals painting. And just to see the difference, really. I mean, anyway, I lightened up the one on the Frans Hals side, actually, because there's scenes in the background. There's a man down below. You can see behind the woman's collar. You know, the woman is clutching the man. There's more action and more things going on in a room than is typical in a Leyster painting. Now, she dies February 10th, 1660, and she's buried on the property they owned in Heemstede, which is about a 17-minute drive from the center of Haarlem. Since then, that whole site where her whole family and the little children would have been buried has been bowled over and built over. So for 230 years, she's completely forgotten. There's nothing written about her. Before this purchase by the Louvre Museum in 1892. There were no works attributed to her in any museums. There were no sales catalogs mentioning her, and there were no prints of any of her work. So this painting is bought by the Louvre, and 50-year-old Monet, you know, one of the Impressionists, well, he's just raves about it. He loves the free brushwork, the informal manner. All the Impressionists are just so pleased with this purchase the Louvre has done. The critics are all over it. And then Cornelius Hofstede de Groot, who's kind of been studying this strange monogram of the J and the L and the star and kind of tied it to the brewery. He finds it. You won't believe where it is. It's right on the blue tablecloth above the guy's foot. And once he brings it to the attention, and it's like, how did that get there? Everything, they find that the signature of Frans Hals has been forged. De Groot goes on and spots the monogram in 7 other paintings that have been attributed to male artists. The market value immediately drops. The Louvre has to sue the dealer. And I just put a quote up here by somebody. This is in 1964 who writes about this after. This is 1893 we're talking. In 1893, the critics are saying, well, you know, the color's a little discordant. The hands are so sketchy. And the brushwork is flighty, not like free like Monet thought when it was a Hals. It's now flighty brushwork. So it's just, it was easy to get very angry doing this artist and studying and researching her. So take a moment. It says here, some women artists tried to emulate Frans Hals, but the vigorous brushstrokes of the master were beyond their capability. One has only to look at the works of a painter like Judith Leyster to detect the weakness of the feminine hand. That was in 1964. The tampering goes on. The Philadelphia Museum buys this painting called The Gay Cavalier. It's 2 men having a last drink at night and everything with a lamp, a table lamp. You see that leg of the skeleton's long leg down the center of the piece? That was a lamp leg, and the whole shape of the skeleton was painted over by a dealer at one point. But the Philadelphia Museum saw a copy of this painting with the skeleton. They said, let's just x-ray it and see what's behind it. And sure enough, they find this skeleton that's leaning in. He's got a skull in one hand, and he's holding up an hourglass above in the other. So The dealer painted it over. It's now a Judith Leyster called The Last Drop. The date is 1629, the first year that she was an independent artist. Okay, there is one series of paintings that historians do agree that are Judith Leisters, and it's this tulip catalog. Very different from any of the previous work. It's silver point on watercolor paper, and you know that Haarlem was the center of the whole tulip mania and all the blowing, the blooming springs. Sometimes I've got to go there. I've never been there for that, but there's one caveat. The historians say, well, these were done the same year that she gave birth to Helena. So probably she didn't do them all herself. Her husband must have helped her. Go ahead. Then we get Theodore Shrevelius. He's a poet and a writer who travels around and is writing about different areas of the countryside. And here he is publishing something in 1648, 12 years after Judith Leyster got married, 12 years. And he's calling her out as an artist. Then in 2009, this private collection goes up for sale. And this piece along the table edge in the very front is signed like Jufrau, I think it's like Mrs. Molinar, 1658. So it's dated 1658. It's a discovery of one of her late pieces. The collector apologized. She said she knew that the work was Judith Leister's her whole time, but she never wanted to bring it to anybody's attention because she knew she couldn't afford the insurance if that happened. She was over and over apologetic. It immediately sold to another private collector, and it's been totally ignored by historians and critics. 2016. There's this oval portrait found as an English estate that is selling off their works. And it's come to the conclusion that it has to be a self-portrait by Judith Leyster, a second self-portrait in 57. She's like 43 years old, I think. She's well-dressed. She's got one brush. She's got the lace and everything. She's got halo lighting. The thing is that she died a couple months before her husband died. And when he died, everything in the collection was just listed as the deceased. So this was listed in the inventory as an oval portrait of the deceased's wife. So it could be taken as like he did a portrait of his dead wife, or the dead wife did a portrait. So the strangest thing for me is, if you want to get any information about this, I went to Christie's, the auction site, where it was immediately brought up, broke her records and sold, and it's gone into a private collection. And then there was an article in 2017 in ArtNet about it. And that's it. Nobody wants to touch it. Nobody wants to rewrite her story. Nobody wants to say that maybe she kept painting after she got married. Now, she has gotten a little traction, and you might have heard of her, right? I had heard of her, but I just didn't know her story so much. And this is an example of a Google Doodle. In 2009, she was given a retrospective at the National Gallery of Art in DC. In 2021, the Rijksmuseum had their first woman show. She and two other artists, there were 3 women, were given their first female show at the Rijksmuseum. In 2022, the Dutch galleries of the MFA in Boston were, revealed, and they highlighted Judith's work. Her paintings are in the National Gallery in London, the National Gallery in DC, the Currier Museum of Art in New Hampshire, the National Gallery of Women Artists in DC as well. So there are places to go look at for her work. But I think that a lot of it is misattributed, and I'm not the only one that thinks this. And I'm really kind of hoping that we all go out, and when you see her work, you highlight it, post it, share it, and look for her work. Look at you should be able to see a little bit of what might be a difference between a Franz Hals couple and a Judith Leyster couple. So I do have some zines on my website. I wanted to say that her legacy, besides these incredible paintings that we just saw, there's a street named after her in Haarlem now. There's a tulip named after her, and there's a Dutch foundation for mid-career female artists. But I'm hoping that we can all do what we can do to look, to call out, to promote, and to collect. And gift work to the museums. How work gets into museums a lot of time is by gifts. People, collect art and give them to museums. So if you're out there and able to collect a small little piece that might be a Franz Hals, that's a risk, but it could be a Judith Leyster. Do what you can. So it makes, we can change history. I think this is ripe for it. So thank you so much for this talk. I can take some questions. I wanted to say next up is next month, May 24th, I'm going to be talking about Paula Modersohn-Becker, a German artist who has actually, up to this point, the artists do very well in their life and are obscurely forgotten afterwards. I'm now entering, I think, into a series of artists who suffer for their art during their lifetime and then are gaining influence, they were influential during their lifetime, but suffered, and now are getting notoriety, I guess, later. So I'm really excited to go forward. So thank you very much for everything, for listening. Any questions? Hi, Leona. Hi, Rosemary.
Hi.
Did you guys learn anything?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Tilly, when did she get the designation of master?
That was in they think that was in 1629.
And how did she get that?
Yeah. Well, we don't know. We know that the records of the St. Luke's Guild are meticulous, and they tell you what you have to do to get there. You have to have these series of apprenticeships and these certain years of work done, but they don't tell us where she had that. But she had to have done that. So we don't know for sure who she studied with. Probably Peter de Grabber. There hasn't been people interested or ready to translate and look into these documents. She's like a ripe artist that has to be reevaluated. Like, how did she do that? How is she? And for a long time I was reading that she was the only female master in the 17th century in the Dutch world. But then I found there's another one, and don't ask me her name, but yeah, she's one of two, but still that's pretty.
No, I'm absolutely fascinated because what did she do at the age, was it 21 when she became a master, that she was successful, that she could do a self-portrait with 18 brushes and the 19th in a hand?
Yeah.
So obviously she got recognition before that, but what did she do to get that recognition? Is there anything?
And and her father was a brewer. And her, she had no artist in the family that we could see. I mean, there's more that needs to be brought out about her. And she's got a distinctive style. Don't you see in those pieces? It's pretty distinctive from the other artists at the time. But there were a lot of women working during that time too. There's Clara Peters and Rachel Reusch, and I do have some in the zine here that I write about that time period. They weren't masters though, but they could make a living at it. Maria Oosterwijk, they had their genres, and they're not like getting commissions or anything, but they're getting patrons to come and collect out of their shop. So she was a businesswoman too. She must have been, and the fact that she took Franz Hals to court through the guild and won is like, nobody's writing about that. I mean, that's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. So I was really glad to have studied her in the beginning. I was like, oh, why am I doing Judith? I mean, we've seen her, we know her, but no, We haven't seen all her work. We don't know her whole story. So I was really, and I hate the idea that she's written off as soon as she gets married, you know?
Mm.
I just, when we find that, isn't that amazing? So the second self-portrait? It's amazing. It's amazing.
That is great.
Yeah.
So,
But I also found, tell me if I'm wrong, is
Mm.
there a signature with her work? So if Halls is chaos, there's chaos. She
oh, that,
seems to have very tight focus, but there always seems to be three. If it's a portrait of two, then there's either a blob of white, or there is the skeleton lamb, or there's the cat with herself, with the husband. It seems to be
3.
movement always has.
Nice. Nice.
Movement.
Nice. I like that. I like that. Yeah. And that makes the whole diagonal composition too and everything that, it's a good diagonal. Yeah. Very, very.
It's almost like a signature
Mm-hmm,
that
mm-hmm,
differentiates it from Hall's.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not taking anything away from Halls. He's grand too. But it's just that I hated the whole flip with her value. I didn't tell you. I think that that piece that the Louvre bought, the reason why they took him to court was the value dropped 25% when they reattributed it to a woman.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Phyllis says she kept seeing triangles. Yeah, yeah, very good. I loved it. Yes.
Mm.
So I need to share that more.
Yeah, her balance was wonderful in all her pieces. With the color and the positioning, her composition, and then the balance of color was striking, I think.
So you didn't find the color discordant?
No, I found it balancing. I mean, yeah, sometimes it's discordant, but that doesn't, it's so tightly, woven with color and balance and weight and light and all of that. And she just had a natural way of doing that. So that's part of her signature, I think, too.
Yeah, I really love the Jolly Topper with that red feather, that red feather. And then he has a ruddy red cheeks kind of too. It's good. Well, thank you. And I hope you all go out and find your own Leyster. And maybe,
nice.
and maybe before anybody attributes it to her, so you can, no, once you say it's a Leyster, it'll be cheaper. So, you get the price drop and you can buy it and then get it going. Get it into a museum or something. I'm sure there's a lot of her work out there that,
Well, you don't really know how prolific she was because there's not a lot attributed to her.
Right. But we do know that she had 3 students in her place. They would have been doing knocking off those merrymakers, like she does one, and then they do the part. So it was kind of a shop, and they get the training there. So the records, they have to be records. There just have to be. Haven't found them yet, So.
Yeah, they're in somebody's basement or attic, and some tag sale they'll show up. Probably not around here, though.
The flowers were so different. The flower paintings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was very different. Yeah.
I think, it was. Yeah, and the tulips. I was thrown in the beginning by so these are the only paintings she did after, all that. But that would have been for money.
More. They were so good.
They were good. They were good. And I think they made a good living. And, she didn't have an inheritance. She didn't have, she helped support her parents. They, the funds just from her art went a long ways. So there was some great comments I can see from YouTube as well. So, yeah. And Phyllis says, I'm amazed by the movement to capture that without being able to freeze the action like we can with a camera. Yeah. The thrown back heads and everything. Yeah.
The children. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And her portrait is beautiful. Yeah. Thank you guys for coming and looking.
Thank you, Tilly.
I appreciate you sharing all of this, Tilly.
Thank you.
I learned something new, introduced to a new female artist. There aren't enough of us around.
Really.
And I hope the price is high and doesn't fall.
Yes, yes, good. Yes, yes, me too. And there are so amazing, all these artists. It's good. It's really they're out there, and I'm looking forward to. I've got 10 of them here to do. On this 10 of them. So each one is teaching me something new about me as an artist too. And so it's very cool. So
Thank you.
thank you guys.
You.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you.
You can scan this code and find out more that's going on with the Inspiration Art Group. I thank them for their sponsorship. I really appreciate it. You guys have a great day, the rest of it.
Thank you.
See you next month.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Bye.
Bye.